Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make big synth pads in Reason. Some of these synths can be heard by the artist Gemini or other artists like that make these really big super saw sounding pads. I will also give you some of the sound design techniques that you need so that you can make these synths yourself, and that you can also apply these tips to any synthesizer that you have if you don't in fact have Reason. So first I'd like to go ahead and provide an overview of the sound so you have a reference for the rest of this video. So the first layer that we have of the 3 layers is this bass layer, which sounds like this. This first bass layer is a thick sounding layer, and this actually provides most of the body for the synth sound. And this is one of the most important parts to getting these really filled out pad sounds. The next layer that we have are these super saws that are high passed. This provides the top part and the more melodic elements of the synth sound, which soloed sounds like this. And finally, we have a layer of white noise with some added delay. This noise helps fill out the remaining parts of the frequency spectrum. White noise can also be used in all sorts of electronic music, especially electro house tracks, to help fill the drop and to make it sound bigger. So solo, the white noise layer sounds like this. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at that first patch. So inside this patch we have first a line mixer 6:2 because we're going to be running a second instance of the channel of this Thor in a little later with the delay. And if we go ahead and look at the patch, if you initialize it, set it to mono legato, and then take your filter, and all you're going to do is bring that all the way up and overdrive it to a mountain of 78 to provide a little bit of distortion to this sound. The next section that we have is just make sure to bring up the amp envelope sustain all the way up so you don't lose any volume over time. So what we're going to do is make a really thick sounding bass. So you're going to do that by creating a multi-oscillator in the first slot, a wavetable oscillator in the second one, and finally a third analog oscillator in the third slot on the synthesizer. For the first one, we're going to have an octave of 3, a square wave with the pulse width at 24, so that we have a pulse wave instead of just a pure square wave, which would be up here. And then next, we're going to go down to the wavetable oscillator, put the octave at 3, change it to the mixed waves wavetable, and put the position at 32. The next thing that we're going to do is add an analog oscillator at octave 3 with a sine wave, just to provide a little bit of bass to the synth sound. If we move over to the mixer section, turn the balance of oscillator 1 and 2 to 84 so that we hear more of this mixed waves one. This will help provide most of the tone for the synthesizer. And then bring the level down on the sine wave to negative 4.2 dB, just so the sine wave isn't too loud. The next thing you're going to want to do is take the chorus, bring the dry wet to 24, and this will help provide a little bit of stereo width to the bass sound. Next, all we have in this patch is a maximizer with the input gain turned up. This will help provide a little bit of punch and beefiness to the sound. Put the input gain at 2.4, limiter, turn on the 4 milliseconds look ahead, and put a fast attack and a fast release on this limiter. Next, in the soft clip section, go ahead and enable that, turn the amount up to 82. This will help providing a little bit of digital distortion to the sound to make it sound thicker. The next thing that we're going to do is have a split instance of this Thor with the Spider audio. If we look at what it's doing here, we take the output of the Thor, plug it into a Spider audio, take one of the outputs right here, run it into this channel in the mixer, take another output, run it into this delay, which is right here, run it into another channel of the mixer. So what I'm doing here is called the Haas effect, I believe. So if you want more information about it, you can Google it. It's HASS. And what I did here is I panned this one negative 26 to the left and this one 26 to the right. And then all I did with this digital delay unit is I took it, changed it to 7 milliseconds of delay, so it's a really short delay with 0 feedback. So all this is doing is delaying the instance that's in our right ear by 7 milliseconds, and that it creates a stereo width to the sound. So with the full delay unit, we have this, and without it, we have this. So again, that just helps add the stereo width because we delay it by 7 milliseconds. The next thing that I did at the top was I added an equalizer just to cut a little bit of the low mids to keep it from being muddy. Turn on param 1, put the frequency at 277, and bring the gain down just a tiny bit to -5, and put the Q at 4.4. This will just provide a scoop right here to remove some of the low mids from the synth. Now the next thing that I did here was I added a stereo imager. But I didn't actually use this to make the sound any wider. All I did was bring the crossover frequency down to 179 and then made that everything below here mono. So you just want to make sure that when you widen a bass frequencies like we did with the chorus and the Haas effect, you want to make sure that the sub frequencies are mono, like we did at the top with a stereo imager. Because on a stereo system with two speakers, the bass frequencies will cancel out if they're in fact widened. If you're using another synth to make this first layer, all you need to make sure is your bass sounds full, because it will be providing most of the low mids for the synth sound. So that finishes up the first instance, or this first bass. Now let's go ahead and look at the supersaw sound that we'll be creating next. This patch looks extremely complicated, but it's actually quite simple. Most of what I did here is just copy and paste the synth a bunch of different times. So first, create a line mixer 6:2 in the patch, and let's go ahead and look at these pan positions because we'll be panning each individual subtractor left and right. The first one is panned all the way left, the second one is panned all the way right, the third one is panned -24, the fourth one is panned +24, just 24 on this pan, and then the next one is -50, and the next one is +50. So first what we're going to do is make the main synth patch, and then we're going to copy it over 5 times and detune each individual synth. So all we're doing is basically making our own supersaw oscillator, just like some of the multi-oscillators inside of the Thor. So what you're going to do on the first instance is make sure to create a subtractor, initialize it, put it on a saw waveform, make sure the octave's at 4, bring your filter all the way up, and your amp envelope all the way up. The next thing that we're going to do is take this detune amount right here, this cent, and bring it up to 5. Now what you're going to want to do is take it and duplicate the synth patch 5 different times. Now in each subtractor, you will detune the cent value with a positive number on the left and a negative value on the right. So in the second synth, if we open it up, what you're going to want to do is take the cent value and put it to -5. And also on this patch, I took the octave and moved it up to 5 just to add a little bit of harmonics to the sound to make it sound a little bit more filled out. So if we look at the next patch, we have it going up 10, so detune amount of 10. And then the next patch, we have -10. And then the next patch, we have +15. And the next patch, we have -15. So just make sure if you added like a +6, you add a -6, and then pan them left and right, and it'll help create a wide stereo sound. The next thing I did is I added low shelf just to cut up out the lows and to high pass it. I brought the frequency all the way up to 600 Hertz, the gain all the way down, and left the Q at its default position. The next thing that I did was I took the param 2, turned the gain down to 5 decibels, put the frequency at about 5000 Hertz, and left this Q value where it is at. This provides just a small scoop to cut out some of these fizzy frequencies that I found right here in the synth. The next thing I did is this had a lot of high frequency content that I didn't want inside of this synth. So what I did is turn on this high pass filter and remove the gain about 2 decibels. The next thing that I did is I created a stereo imager, widened everything above 203 Hertz by an amount of 17, just to provide a little bit of stereo width. Then again, I took the low frequencies and made them mono by an amount of -8, so anything that's down here, I made sure it was mono. Alright, so that finishes up our second patch. If you are using another synth such as Antidote, one of the rack extensions in Reason, Massive, or Silent, select a saw wave and increase in the voicings tab, it might also be called the unison tab, to the maximum amount. This will give you the same sort of wide supersaw sound effect. Just make sure that with this layer you have a lot of high frequency content, then it sounds wide. The technique I use for this synth with all the subtractors can also be used to create those big progressive plucked trans synths. So now let's go ahead and look at the final layer. The final layer is going to be a noise layer that you can use any noise oscillator or any noise sample that you have. So the first patch that we're going to do is just an initialized version of Thor. I added in a noise oscillator and changed it to a white noise, and then basically brought this filter up all the way so it's not actually having any effect. The next thing that I did is made sure to change the amp envelope sustain all the way up so the sound does not die out over time. And then I added a state variable filter on high pass mode to cut out everything below 1056 Hertz. Next I added just a tiny bit of chorus. I went ahead, turned that on, and brought the dry wet down to 9 just so it's widening out this instance just a little bit more. The next thing that you're going to want to do is going to copy and paste this synth sound exactly the same and then run it into a mixer. And then just like we did with before with the supersaw synth, you're going to want to pan this one hard left and this one right here hard right. On the second instance of Thor, all you're going to want to do is change its high pass position and bring it down just slightly. Because this synth sound is slightly different than the other one, when you pan them left and right, it will create a stereo width in the sound. So now if we go ahead and look at the effects that I applied, I took the master output of this mixer. So we have these 2 Thors running in, and I took the master output and then plugged it into an equalizer. Again, did the same thing that I did on the supersaw synth where I high passed it. I took it and put the low shelf all the way up to 600 Hertz, the gain down to -18 decibels, left this where it's at, and then I cut with 8 decibels at 6000 Hertz, and I boosted the high frequency shelf at around 3000 hertz by 3 decibels. The next thing that I applied to the synth was a unison unit with the voice count at 16, detune at 40, and the dry wet at 22. This will again detune 16 instances of this synth sound that's running in here, and then pan them slightly so we can get a little more stereo width out of the synth sound. The next thing that I did was add in an echo unit. I changed it to the time to 3/16. Then I changed the right channel offset to 64th notes, so it's offsetting the right channel by a 64th note. This will again help add a little bit of stereo width to the sound and also add a little bit of delay. Just make sure your feedback is at 57% and that your dry wet is at an amount of 16. The final thing that I did to the synth sound was I took a stereo imager, made everything above 247 a little wider at an amount of 19, just again to add more stereo width to the white noise layer. So that finishes off the sound. You can use what I've showed you with these 3 layers of synths to create your own big sounding synth pads. Also, the demo I showed you in the intro, I sidechained all 3 synths to the kick drum of those dubstep drums. Just look on YouTube how to sidechain to whatever digital audio workstation you have, and something should come up. So let's finally look at the notes that I used in this kind of patch so you know how to effectively use it to create these kind of synth sounds. So in the first bass patch, I just have one note playing, and that is an F at octave 1. In the big saw layer, I have the synth playing an F right here, a C, another F, and then even a lower F, so it's spanning 3 different octaves and then sort of playing a chord right here in between. And make sure you want to do big chord layers with this sound because that's the one that's going to help fill out the drop. And then the noise layer, it doesn't actually matter what note you're playing because it's just a noise, so you can play whatever. Just make sure the value of this noise is the same length as all the others. All right, so that concludes the video. If you liked the video, subscribe to keep up to date with future videos, and feel free to leave a comment or send me a message if you have a question. Thanks, and see you next time.